Oh, hi everybody, thank you for joining us today for our webinar on ERP fatigue, how to maximise ERP value realisation. My name is John Haley. I'm a Territory Manager here at Syspro Software. Syspro Software, of course, being one of the world's largest ERP vendors, specifically focused on... can you hear me? Yep, sorry, excuse me there. Specifically focused on Tier 2, but also with Tier 1 and Tier 3 clients, of course, and specifically focusing on the manufacturing and distribution industries, but again, working across a number of them as required. Joining me today, I have Warwick Strangwood. Warwick's an independent ERP business analyst. He's spent the last 20-odd years implementing ERP and related systems into a range of organisations, from chemical and food manufacturers through to health service organisations, and in places that vary from Kosovo and Moscow with the Red Cross through to Switzerland with the United Nations. Warwick's an APIC CPIM. He's Prince 2 certified and started out as a chartered accountant. He's worked for both on the vendor side and on the client side, so he's got a really good understanding of the challenges, disciplines, and even more importantly, the realities of implementing and sustaining ERP systems within organisations of all sizes. Today's webinar we expect to go for around about 45 minutes. There'll be some question time at the end. There's a facility on the control panel on your right to allow you, or usually on your right, to allow you to submit your own questions, and we encourage you to do so. For the most part, we'll leave the questions till the end, but if we see a particularly strong trend of them at some point through the presentation and it makes sense, we'll address them immediately. Copies of today's presentation will be made available to everyone who's a registered attendee in the coming days, and just keep an eye on your inboxes for details on how to access those. So today we're going to address, as I said, the question that after investing potentially a lot of time and money into implementing an ERP system, why is it that after several years many people can experience symptoms of what we're calling ERP fatigue, and of course what can we do about that? So I think I'll hand over to you, Warwick, to take it from there.
Thanks, John. Great to be here today, to see you again. If I can start by saying that I actually went to the opening of the Melbourne Comedy Festival last night, and I laughed, I have to say I laughed so much I walked out exhausted. But it was a very, very different feeling of exhaustion than what we're actually going to talk about today. And so in approaching this topic, what I thought we'd do is I want to jump straight in and take a look at exactly what is this thing that we talk about when we talk about ERP fatigue, just so that everyone's on the same page. And then we'll just step back, we'll take a bigger picture perspective of understanding what the different phases are within our normal ERP life cycle, so that we can see where these ERP fatigue signs might be appearing. And we'll look at some of the key actions and the disciplines that we undertook as part of our original ERP implementation that set us off on the right path and set ourselves up for the biggest part of our ERP life, which we refer to as the value realisation phase, before any of these ERP fatigue signs started appearing. And then we'll just step through what actually happens to the business during this value realisation phase that may cause us to have these signs of ERP fatigue. And then we'll talk about best-in-class companies and some of the things that they do to address these issues. And we're going to end up talking about a set of actions that organisations, any organisation, can deploy to try and start addressing some of these issues. Okay, so let's jump in at the deep end here. What exactly is ERP fatigue? Well, this quote should help us understand a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Somewhere in the years after implementation, we lose our mean and lean shine. Users start to feel the frustrations associated with overly complex, time-consuming, labour-intensive processes and efforts to extract relevant information, resulting in inconsistent reports. Spreadsheets and databases multiply as users desperately attempt to fill functionality gaps in an ERP system that feels anything but state of the art.
Now I'm going to take this moment, over the course of today, we're going to put up a handful of polls, and I'm going to take this moment to put up the first of them. They're reasonably simple to respond to. Just pick the option that you think most accurately reflects you, and in this case, on a scale of 1 to 4, how do you gauge your current ERP situation as it relates to ERP fatigue? So while everyone's responding to that, I think I'll pass it back over to you, Warwick.
Thanks, John. We'll just keep an eye on the poll results, and we'll feedback information to everyone on the sort of poll results and any interesting trends that start coming through. What we typically expect is a lot of organisations may end up being in that category too, sort of in the below expectations, could improve somewhere between 1 and 3, unless you're a best-in-class organisation. Okay, so whilst we're getting those poll results coming through, what we are going to talk about is we're going to quickly touch on the ERP Lifecycle. And in doing that, we want to emphasise one thing to start with, and this is reflected in the quote, that the research proves that there is in fact a direct positive connection between ERP systems and business performance. And in particular, I want people today to keep in mind the concept of the ERP systems being this backbone across the organisation. It's a way of applying our standard practices and our business rules. And when I talk about a backbone, we're not talking about something that's inflexible. When you talk to your chiropractor about this, a backbone, it's a way of keeping the business together. It's a way of synchronising it. It's a way of keeping it under control. And we all know that businesses perform far better when they have controlled, efficient, repeatable and standardised business processes. So let's take a look at this thing that we call the ERP Lifecycle, just to understand the key phases that we go through. We start with the implementation over a year or two, and that is followed by this bedding down optimization phase. We then move into maturity and the value realization phase. This is the longest period of our life, and inevitably we will move into a decay period, and this is where our backbone no longer functions in a way that really supports the business. Now the curves on the screen represent the sort of return on investment from the ERP system that we typically would achieve if we were classified as a best-in-class company, which is companies that can demonstrate best practice with respect to things like policies, procedures, technology management, etc., as opposed to those organisations that we would loosely refer to as laggards, those organisations that still have some way to go. So as a generalisation, we should be looking to get around about, let's say around about 15 years of life out of our ERP. That sort of sounds about what I'd be expecting. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb for today's ERP's work. Where tools such as workflow and similar technologies make in-system tailoring so much easier, they don't compromise the upgrade path, so that business evolution can really be facilitated within the system quite easily. Historically, of course, that time was a bit more variable, and some sites using old-style ERPs were forced to change a bit earlier than they might have liked to due to inflexibility within the system, requirements to really keep to core processes or compromising upgrade paths, and of course in some cases a simple lack of product development or the product disappearing from the market. But generally I think that's a pretty good rule.
Okay, so because we want to end up talking about the value realisation in more detail, I'm going to leave that to last. And similarly, implementation, we'll touch on that because there's an important connection there. So we're going to actually start by quickly touching on the optimisation and the decay stages. So let's quickly talk about optimisation and what we mean by optimisation. This is a really good quote. Although it's too early to have realised substantial benefits, the organisation's put in place the knowledge sharing mechanisms. They've formed the cross-functional teams. They've improved their knowledge competencies, and they've standardised processes, and they've eliminated silo behaviour. So that quote also supports the concept of backbone, of standardisation and of rules. So we've gone through the challenges of implementation, and now we're starting to put into practice all of those things that we learnt and that we've been trained on. So at the end of this optimisation phase, we should be looking to undertake our first major checkup, if you like. Right? So for an ERP implementation or an ERP system, we should be looking at a post-implementation review. And during this sort of exercise, we're taking all the metrics, we're measuring the benefits that we should be getting out of the system, we're comparing them against the original expectations, against the original business case, or the estimates. We're doing a warts and all assessment as to whether we're really getting the benefits out of our ERP system and whether we're still on the right path.
Which leads me rather neatly to the second poll we're going to put up on the screen. Did you undertake a post-implementation review 1 year or thereabouts after implementation? As Warwick said, it's something that's very important, but I think at times it's something that can be overlooked very easily, and we're going to be talking about why that is, of course, as we move through. And I can already see the results coming in that it's very heavily in favour of no review or a partial review at best. So back over to you, Warwick.
Thanks, John. No real surprises there, I have to say. Okay, let's move on from optimisation. We're going to touch on decay. This is the last phase in our life cycle, and this is when we've really got all the benefits that we can out of our ERP system, and effectively it's at the end of its useful life. Now, it's not always easy to actually recognise if you've reached this phase, as we see later on when we talk about ERP fatigue. But the sort of things you might be looking at to assess whether you might be there is around core basic functionality that's actually available in your ERP system. Maybe it's no longer acceptable to the business. We've got non-integration across modules, a lack of functional breadth, ever-growing functional gaps. The cost benefit basically starts leaning the wrong way. And we're getting data fragmentation because we're trying to fill these functionality gaps. We might find that we simply physically cannot efficiently and effectively extract the sort of mission-critical data that we need to report back to management to make our critical decision-making. It could be that the ERP is unable to provide the sort of technology platform and tools that we actually require. So the business might be talking about trying to do application integration, remote access, radio frequency, smartphone integration, integration with third suppliers, all those sorts of things, and we simply technically can't do it. And it could actually be a support and maintenance issue. We could be finding that upgrades are extremely expensive, fixes are slow to get through, or indeed the ERP itself is actually no longer developed or even supported. And we should remember here that there's actually been a lot of consolidation in the marketplace over the last 5 to 10 years. And there are a variety of what we would consider good ERP systems that no longer have a future. They're no longer being developed, even though they may be being supported. So it's a very grey area, and it's certainly got to be carefully considered before you make your conclusion as to whether you are actually in that phase or you are just experiencing this ERP fatigue. But it's fair to say that if you think you're in that period, then there's probably a fair bet that someone like John is going to be very keen to talk to you. Right, John? I'm going to take it back up. John's mic's gone. So we're going to move on from decay. We're going to talk about implementation, because this is really, I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on this, but this is the fun part. This is what started it all. This is where we did the late nights. This is where we did the endless workshops. And we all went through these to set ourselves up for the next decade of superior performance, of this unprecedented growth that we're going to go through in search of these ultimate business processes. And I think it's really important here to remind ourselves that the implementation of the ERP software is just a part of the real implementation project, which we often refer to these days as being the business transformation project. Because back in the 90s, when we talked about ERP projects, we thought of them as technology projects. They were managed by IT. We now know that that's fundamentally just the wrong way to go about it. They're actually business projects, and they involve people change, they involve process change, together with technology ERP software. And it's these three, the people, the process and technology, that are all aligned, that's what actually positively impacts our business performance. So recognising the difference between just an ERP software and the bigger business transformation project is really important, and you'll see that as we go through further on today. The other thing that I think is really important to remember is that this implementation phase is getting shorter and shorter. As businesses are changing faster and faster, we no longer have the luxury to sit and navel gaze and to ponder the holy grail of exactly how we should run our business processes and what we're going to look like. So this is where we really need to put our best people onto it, and to also use proven implementation methodologies. Okay, but what was it that we actually did during this ERP implementation phase that is so important to what we're going to talk about today? So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about. So when we started our business transformation project, we implemented our ERP system. This is in fact what we really did. The first thing is we got senior management commitment. This is what gives us the overall accountability and the common purpose culture that is critical for ERP success. The second thing is we committed internal subject matter expert resources. And this brings about the necessary knowledge transfer and the knowledge sharing that's required to design our optimized processes. The third thing that we did was, from the senior management commitment that we got, we built business ownership. The idea that it's the business that owns the ERP system, and it's the business that's responsible for its success. It's not IT. The fourth thing we did was we invested a lot of time and money analysing the business in order to come up with our standardised set of optimised end-to-end business processes. Furthermore, we then centralised and integrated our data across the organisation as much as possible to minimise the possibility of any sort of data inconsistency and duplication, and wanting to ensure that there is only one source of the truth. We then introduced standards and business rules, and wherever possible we try and embed these within our ERP system. In this way we can control and we can consistently apply these rules across the business, whilst we can still cater for business change. So as the business changes, we change our rules, we change the rules in the ERP system, and therefore we ensure that the business continues to consistently apply the required rules to meet the business requirements. We selected a best fit ERP system to meet our business requirements, and we combined that with cost-effective workarounds wherever we had these requirement gaps. They were designed and managed workarounds. And the last thing we did was we trained our users in the capability of the system itself, as well as the actual current procedures. So we've got our work instructions, but we also told the subject matter experts, we told our champions what the system was capable of. And because they were involved in the implementation, they actually know this. They've seen it through the whole implementation. Now, if you honestly don't believe that these sorts of things are important, then I would urge you to go to the web, go to your search engine and type in the words ERP failures and take a read at some of the stuff that's there. You will be horrified and you will be amazed at some of the stories. And these are organisations that never even got to an ERP fatigue situation. They never got past first base. And even I've got to say that I've walked away from implementations where, for a variety of reasons, I can see that they are simply drifting away from all of these sorts of core priorities, core disciplines, core objectives, and you can see that they're simply setting themselves up for a fairly horrible experience. But today's not about implementation methodologies. We just want to understand that what we're doing is we're putting in place this culture, this discipline, these practices and the technology that are all designed to work in unison to support the fundamentals of the business. So when we just quickly, when we talk about supporting the business fundamentals, what we're saying is that we can narrow that down to the fact that our business is fundamentally about survival and expansion, and that equates to increasing revenues and decreasing costs. When we cut to the chase, that's what it's all about. And all of those actions that we just talked about are ultimately designed to build better processes, which in turn provides better data, better interactions, which leads to better decision making. And that's what increased revenues and decreased costs is all about. And to see the sort of difference that we find between what we talk about as best-in-class and laggard companies, I've got a couple of graphs up on the screen now, which there's some sort of interesting information that's in a couple of these areas. I'm going to highlight a couple of them. This is the first one. It's a very telling one. Best-in-class versus laggard, 70% and 30%. Best-in-class companies typically will always measure the return on their investment of the ERP projects. They understand that the implementation doesn't finish when you go live. And they have in place the culture to measure the effectiveness of their ERP system on an ongoing basis. And we're going to come back to that. The other one that I'd like you to just look at is over here. This is the other telling one, 81% against 47%. Best-in-class companies understand that the line of business ultimately owns the success of the implementation. And they're very much telling research that we've got. Okay, so we've talked enough about implementation and of certain disciplines and activities, but now I'm going to move on and I want to talk about, I'm just going to get my slide to move on. We're going to talk about this biggest period of our life. This is the period that is of most interest to us today. It's the longest period, and it's when we expect our ERP system to reap the greatest benefit to us, the greatest return on our investment. This is our value realization phase. And as this quote indicates, it's where the ongoing disciplines that we committed ourselves to during our implementation, in order to get that alignment of people, process and technology, that is what is the determining factor in whether we achieve that return on investment. Now, during this phase, let's talk about the sort of common perceptions that start to creep in that management will feel. So that there are these growing perception that something is simply not right in the ERP sphere. And the sort of signs that we hear about, we get are generally classed into one of these four. That the ERP system, it simply doesn't provide the data that's required by the business, whether it's finance, production, procurement, service management, to make the sort of decisions that they're needing to actually make. It could be a case of inaccurate proposals. It could be simply inaccurate information as to what to make, what to buy. Or it could be that it's simply taking too long. It's not timely, it's not fast enough for me to make my decisions. The second thing is that we're getting different reports that are providing different information or conflicting information. The third thing is that our business processes are becoming complex, time-consuming, labour-intensive. The team has generally got the perception that the ERP system, it isn't working, so they're developing workarounds in spreadsheets and the like, and staff are spending too much time working in all of these systems. And the last one is this feeling that the ERP is simply not as state-of-the-art as it used to be. And it's fair to say that these perceptions are not necessarily uncommon. And I talk about them as perceptions because although they may be real, they may be what organisations are actually feeling, but they may actually be a creation of the organisation's own making. And they're therefore not really a reflection of what reality should or could be. But let me say this, what we do know is that business performance is the result of people, process and technology. And in the small to medium market, in the vast majority of cases, the technology per se is not the problem.
Yeah, you know, It's a really interesting point that you make there, Warwick. A lot of the time when businesses come to the Syspro family, it's for absolutely understandable reasons. You know, they have a laundry list of reasons they need either a new system or a system to begin with. But there's usually a handful on that list that boil down to, well, you could do that in your existing systems. But ERP fatigue is set in with these people, and it's just gotten too hard. For our own part, it's something that we're here at Syspro are really actively working to ensure against, as our today's presentation shows. It's something we've been thinking about over the last few years a lot, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But we're taking a lot of steps with features within the system, as well as within our implementation methodology, as well as within our support structures, to make sure that ERP fatigue stays out of the Syspro community. And I'm going to take another opportunity here to throw up a poll, and this one being, does your organisation maintain an operations issues register where you're tracking, data, process reporting issues, and these types of things? Warwick's going to touch on. He's touched on. We're going to talk about further the importance of this, but it's another thing that I think is interesting. And looking at the votes coming in, it's pretty much leaning towards the no, not overwhelmingly, but a little bit so, which is going to feed into what Warwick's about to talk about.
Thanks, John. So we know that this is what we're experiencing. We talk about this dark cloud of ERP fatigue. Now, during a lot of things that are going on, there's a lot of organisational change that's taking place. And so what I want to now talk about is quickly is what are these things that are going on in the background that are actually impacting us? Why is it that our planets, if you like, are no longer aligned? What's actually happened? And the key organisational change characteristics that take place during these 10 odd years, if you like, can be summed or basically classed into one of these 5 things. And the first thing is to do with staff turnover rates. And staff turnover rates, depending on the industry you're in and the sort of circumstances you're in, they may vary between 20 and 80%, or I've seen cases of more than that over a 5-year period. The second thing is the business model continues to evolve. Our business is constantly changing. We're developing new products. We've got new customers, new suppliers we're working with, new trading agreements. There are new business rules, and that's organic growth, organic change. The third thing is that the business is actually adopting operational technology advances. So we're talking about things like, it might be barcoding, it could be radio frequency, web ordering, these sorts of things. So the operational side of the business is grabbing this stuff and they're saying, we're going to implement it because we need it to make ourselves more efficient, to serve our customers better, etc. The fourth thing is that individuals are off fine-tuning their business silos. There are workarounds, there are shortcuts that are being implemented into the business processes in a siloed manner. And the last thing is that we find that the day-to-day focus reverts back to a departmental viewpoint, a viewpoint that really reflects our organisational structure and our financial accountability. So that we've gone from this process thinking back to our departmental viewpoint, where I'm responsible for an area, I'm concerned about the efficiency and the effectiveness of my team, my performance. I will do whatever I need to make my area most efficient, etc. These are the things that are happening constantly over that 10-year period. Now, what we're now going to do is draw the link. We're now going to try and draw the link between all of those organisational change characteristics and our ERP fatigue to try and understand what that connection is. Okay, so the first impact, what we started out, and the way the screen described it, is we started out when we did our implementation. Let's think back to each of our implementation characteristics. We committed all of these subject matter expert resources. We got senior management on board. We got commitment. We built the business ownership of the ERP solution. But what's happened over those value realisation years, those 10 odd years, is gradually the ERP team, the project team, and the disciplines start to cease. The team itself is disbanded. the training that we had in place, the training ceases. The organisation no longer measures a return on our investment or the ERP effectiveness. And that's largely because incoming management do not take ownership and accountability of the ERP system. We may have had it there when we implemented the system. We had an application owner. We had process owners. They've moved on, they've moved up, they've moved out. Incoming management have not taken over those critical roles and responsibilities and the ownership and the accountability of the ERP system. That's the first thing. The second impact we find is that we started out when we did implementation centralizing and integrating all of our data. We built these standards, we built these business rules. But as staff have changed, people have started to do their workarounds, we've started to get this situation where disparate systems are developed. And when I talk about systems, I'm simply saying things like Excel spreadsheets. It could be Word documents with contracts, agreements, information in them. It could be Microsoft Access databases. All these little systems start to get developed and our data fragments. We find that we have a lack of data quality control. We have no mechanisms in place to stop this actually happening. As a result of all of that, what we find is that any attempts for data integration and consistency become increasingly complex and increasingly manual. Effectively, we've lost our discipline of managing our data. And as this happens, we find that the administration effort that goes into managing all of this and controlling all of this and fixing all of this, as we're trying to keep all of these systems in sync, it simply increases, as do all the inconsistencies in the reports, as does the frustration. It becomes this spiraling effect, which leads to these sort of ERP fatigue symptoms. So that's all about business data. The third thing I want to touch on is the business processes themselves. We invested significant time and money analysing the business. We designed these optimised end-to-end business processes. And we did that around what was a best fit ERP solution. And we put in place our cost-effective workarounds. But over time, what's actually happened is that we've got these local workarounds, these local shortcuts. We now have a lack of understanding of any downstream impacts of those. The workarounds themselves have now become the standard practice. As the staff changes, that workaround becomes standard practice. It's now set in stone. And anything that we put in place during the implementation about process improvement, that culture starts to wane. And I've got a client that I've been working on recently, and we had very standard, very efficient business processes that we developed during the implementation. And they've simply been changed over time by individuals to meet a perceived need in their specific area without actually understanding the reasons why the process was that way. They didn't understand the considerable impact in terms of the administrative effort that is now required in order to service that ongoing need. The position itself has changed probably 5 times in 15 months. That doesn't help. There is now no longer an understanding as to why we designed that business like that in the first place. There were very good reasons. So our process has got workarounds, and that is now the standard practice. So it's fair to say that in some cases the business does deliberately change the process. Obviously that's continuous improvement, but then we don't revisit the ERP to see how it needs to change to maintain the alignment. Do we need to change the configuration? Do we need to do a report modification? Do we need to change the way we capture information? Are we now capturing scrap or yield? Do we need to do something in the system to do that? Do we need to switch back flushing on or off? Do we need to add or remove the way we're using phantom items? Or do we just need to change our chart of accounts? These are the sort of questions that we need to ask. Okay, the fourth thing that we're going to talk about quickly is poor knowledge transfer. And this is probably one of the most common ones, where basically institutional knowledge within the organisation about the ERP setup, the configuration, all of that leaves the organisation. We don't replenish it. We don't have a formal process for bringing new people up to an acceptable level of knowledge. And in a lot of cases, issues arise because of the poor internal documentation. New users develop workarounds. Everything's word of mouth. They use the system incorrectly, and so these new processes become cast in stone. There are few organisations, I have to say, that have quality knowledge transfer programs. And as the staff turnover continues to increase these days, the size of the impact of that is likewise increasing. And as the accountability of the ERP decreases, what we find that it becomes much easier to simply blame the system than actually looking at the organisation's inability to adequately train the staff, keep our work instructions and our process documentation up to date. The last thing that we observe, the fifth impact of organisational change, is really around ERP vendor relationships. And this is actually one of the first to go. It drops off the radar very soon after implementation as the view of our ERP vendor becomes one of support rather than an ongoing source of ideas and as a solutions consultant. So we don't maintain that value-add relationship. And we certainly don't take advantage of the sort of web-based support mechanisms, the forums that are out there, the training tools, the training mechanisms that are actually very often available. And we also find that very often we start to move into using an outdated version of the product. So not only do we have functionality and technology that may be starting to seem old, but we're not even aware of the technology and the functionality that the current version may offer and how it might actually address some of our gaps, some of our business requirements that we don't seem to be able to fulfill. So the relationship that we built with the ERP vendor during the implementation, it wanes for all of these reasons. Through staff changes and people reverting back to a departmental role and responsibility, and the ownership of the ERP drifts. So if you don't have ownership, then who is it who's actually going to build that relationship with your ERP vendor? So I don't know how you feel about that, John, but that's what we tend to find.
Well, I think that's an incredibly true statement, Warwick. As you say, this can happen for a variety of reasons, but it's really important and it's really valuable to understand that a good ERP vendor is always going to be keen to meet with its clients and to help them to maximise their system. It's in everyone's best interests, both vendor and user, to address all of these things and to keep the system really ticking along at its absolute optimum. So, as you've said, Warwick, it's something that drops off very quickly and easily as people view their vendor as a support tool rather than a tool to really drive them forward and to help them continue to gain advantage out of the system. Now I'm going to put up another poll here as well. We've looked at these 5 different impacts. Which of them do you think has had the greatest impact on your specific business? I think that's something that's very much of interest out there. Excuse me. And as they start to trickle in, I think I'll hand over to you, Warwick, to continue on.
Thanks, John. And I've got to say, there are not a lot of surprises here. The concept of ERP ownership, really, that concept struggles a lot these days. Knowledge transfer is always an issue. A lot of the time it's a financial, inverted commas, imperative. And staff changes is certainly up there. Okay, what we're now going to do is, now that we sort of have got a bit of an understanding as to what these impacts are and what the cause and effect is, if you like. We're going to talk about best-in-class companies and the sort of things that they do to prevent or address some of these sort of impacts. And I've divided these into what I call best-in-class cultures and best-in-class actions. And we'll start by talking about best-in-class culture. So if we talk about businesses that fall into this best-in-class category, and the ones that achieve the greatest return on investment for their ERP, if you like, there are distinct cultural differentiators, and these are the most common four that we see. The first thing is that they understand that a successful ERP implementation does not end at go live. If anything, it's actually after the system's been implemented that makes or break the success of the system. And right at the outset, what we tend to see and what we try to see is we want to see in the project plan tasks and responsibilities post go live. Because these sort of organisations understand that the goal is not the ERP implementation itself. It's not installing an ERP piece of software. The goal is actually to achieve certain business objectives. The ERP is simply the tool that we've chosen that we're using to help us get there. And just with all other software applications that we use, the ERP had a business owner, and they have responsibilities and roles, and generally we find that these are tied to their position descriptions. So Powell and Barry summed it up quite nicely by saying the ERP system is more than just an information system. It embodies the organisation's business rules, and it must always be closely tied to the organisation's business needs if the organisation is to realise the system's full benefit. The second cultural aspect that we find is that best-in-class companies understand the importance of fostering ongoing knowledge sharing amongst the different team members, and they have typically formal and informal activities to do this. And they're constantly identifying ongoing training opportunities. So this is part of the organisation's culture. It's not just part of the ERP implementation project plan. The third thing is that they typically have a continuous improvement culture. They are constantly identifying opportunities to improve our business processes. They work with employees to try and identify what are the process pain points, and they follow that up with some sort of root cause analysis to try and identify what the cause is, and they're always looking for ways to automate or to simplify the process, and how their ERP system can be used to try and achieve that. And sort of tied with this is the idea that HR should be there rewarding the right end-to-end business behaviours. That's what they're trying to do. And the last thing is that they actually continue to view the business from a process perspective rather than simply a departmental one. So more often than not, what we start to see is that we see some degree of a matrix organisational structure appearing. So yes, I might answer to my finance director, or I might answer to my production general manager. But I also have a cross-matrix relationship that says I'm actually part of the supply chain process team, and I have a responsibility of that end-to-end process. So there are some of the cultural things. Let's talk about tangible things for a second. So we tend to find that best-in-class companies have most of these, if not all of them, in place. And the first thing is that they actually do have process owners, and they have subject matter experts, and this is all around stopping data fragmentation, so it's embodied in their position descriptions. The second thing is they do have formal knowledge transfer programs and training programs and policies. These are typically linked to their overall employee performance management programs, and they actually have processes in place to monitor and evaluate the individual user and organisational learning. So that's to address institutional knowledge drain through staff departures. They also have processes in place to monitor their business process performance and any leakage, if you like, that might occur. So they understand that, you know, we've got all these lean practices that we deployed on the shop floor. We've got all these disciplines, the teams, etc. But they also understand that these can be very implemented within the administration side of the business, within the finance side of the business. They can apply metrics, and it might be things like the time to invoice, error rates on order entry, these sorts of things. And these sorts of metrics help them to identify and manage siloed behaviour and workarounds that might start to creep in. They also actually have a mechanism to reward end-to-end process improvement behaviours as part of this continuous improvement culture tied into this matrix structure. They also have periodic reviews of report usage. So they're looking at information accuracy, completeness and relevance. So we're removing data fragmentation and we're making sure that management are getting the sort of information that they require to make their decisions. So they're constantly monitoring report usage. And the last thing that best-in-class companies tend to do is that they have these periodic business system audits or reviews. And they're there to really make sure that all of the above actions are actually operational and they're effective. Now, the key thing is that above all, there's one thing that's inherently fundamental in putting all of these sorts of things in place, and it's called senior management. And we touched on this when we talked about the implementation. Senior management commitment is probably the #1 reason for ERP implementation failures. It is senior management that set the culture within the organisation and that the rest of the organisation will follow. Users will simply not do what senior management failed to do. So if senior management don't take ownership and they don't accept accountability and responsibility, then why would we expect the rest of the organisation to? And on it goes. So ultimately, the quality of senior management will be one of the key determinants of whether an organisation can actually achieve best-in-class status. And this issue is very often addressed during the very early days of implementation. We look for those signs. And I would imagine, John, it's something that probably you're very specific about during your implementation as well.
It most definitely is, Warwick. And it ties straight back into that last poll we put up where the greatest response was poor ERP ownership. While we're implementing, this is something that, you know, we really try to drive, and it's a really simple way that we look to tell. At the start of an implementation, the language around all of our training and our discussions tends to be very clear. Yours versus ours. How does your system work? How will you do it in your system, Syspro? And over the course of an implementation, we work really hard to change that language as best we can to, well, how are we going to do it in our system? In our system, this is what we're going to do to solve these problems. Yours versus ours. Ownership at the senior level, at the senior management level, ownership within the business is absolutely crucial, as you've discussed, Warwick.
So we've sort of talked about these kinds of best-in-class actions, and I think what we really need to do now is to move on and talk about what would I be doing if I didn't feel as though I fell into this best-of-class category. What sort of things should I be doing? And I'll start by saying I wouldn't necessarily go straight to looking at my technology. So what I've done is I've classed these into 3 sort of actions, and the first one is people actions. So these are things that we could start to kick off immediately. And the sort of things I'll be saying is, let's identify if we actually have formal or informal ownership for both business processes as well as our ERP system. That will immediately tell us a lot about our overall ownership and accountability. Take a look at your induction training processes. Take a look at your material, if it exists. Take that, calculate your staff turnover, and from that you will roughly be able to figure out how much of your original ERP knowledge still exists in-house. And the third thing is, find out if your HR strategies are actually rewarding continuous improvement efforts and end-to-end behaviours of your staff. If you're not, if they're not, go and have a chat to HR, talk to them about how that can be done. And I would also be looking to see how senior management view or prioritise these sorts of things, these sorts of issues, and the degree to which senior management have maintained the sort of ERP disciplines and actions that we put in place during the implementation. The next thing I'd look at is a couple of process actions. I would start to try and identify how accurate the latest version is of all of our process documentation, and also the user's familiarisation with the logic of it. It only takes us about an hour to find out how far an organisation may have strayed off the track by validating the current working instructions, and ask people why they actually do things this way. And if you listen to the number of times that people say, well, we've always done it that way, then think about what that says both in terms of knowledge transfer and also ownership. It tells us a lot. The second thing is go and review the issues register. Go and have a look at the current process gaps, the pain points, the issues, and have a look at how many of those have been resolved by workarounds. From that, you can start to get a feeling for process efficiency, and you'll get some sort of feeling for data fragmentation. And if you don't have an invoice register, start one. The third thing is I'd start logging some very basic business process performance statistics. So take each process, identify what metrics would be a good measure to identify if that process is efficient and accurate or whether it's out of control. And just come up with a way of measuring that metrics along with some sort of target. Process time is always a good one. You know, if you can understand when a process starts and the tasks that it goes through and when it finishes, process time is a really interesting one to take a look at. Take a look at the number of manual steps there are in a process, or the number of times that the data entry has to take place, or the number of checks or authorizations that take place within that process, or the number of errors that you detect in a process. In all of our business processes, without fail, there is always a metric that will tell us this. And from what you find, you know, you'll start to figure out how good or how bad your processes are, whether they're improving or whether they're getting worse. Longer term, if you don't have a continuous improvement program or methodology, speak to your senior management. And the last thing that we will touch on is a couple of things to do with technology. The first thing is I'd say develop some form of ERP strategy. The Aberdeen Group talk about having an ERP strategy when we actually implement. Now, that may be part of your overall IT strategy, but ultimately what we're talking about is something that outlines the roles that our ERP plays in our organisation. How does it connect to our business strategy or our future challenges or our corporate risk? The strategy should talk about our short-term and long-term plans for the ERP system, our upgrades, customizations, how we're going to handle functionality enhancements, configuration changes. What are the roles and responsibilities for documentation, configuration, those sorts of things. And how often you think your ERP environment might undergo an ERP review. The second thing is quickly investigate local unmanaged sources of data. This is really easy. Walk around your office, talk to your people, ask around for instances of ERP, of things like Excel spreadsheets, Access databases and the like, with data that is not on your application map. That will typically reflect management's frustration with inconsistent data and inconsistent reports. And if you don't have a current application map, create one, make one, get IT to put one together, get the business and IT together. Get an application map going. The third thing is I would identify opportunities in your latest version of the ERP system. Talk to your ERP vendor. Try and match functionality opportunities with your current gaps, with your workarounds, with your pain points that you might have got in your issues register. Start seeing how immediately our technology can help us address some of those sorts of things. So if you weren't on the latest version of your ERP system, then certainly I'm sure, John, you'd be more than interested to talk to anyone who's not on the latest Syspro version with in the audience that may have any issues themselves.
Most assuredly, Warwick. We'd be very happy to talk to both Syspro sites that are on the latest version and help them move forward, and of course any of the other ERPs out there. Be happy to move them onto the latest version of.
Okay, so if we've addressed those sort of process, people and technology actions, and we've put some of these in place, I want to finish with a comment about the idea of these ERP system reviews. And when we talk about a periodic ERP review, what we're talking about is the process whereby we periodically look at all the sorts of things that we've been discussing. So we look at the appropriateness of the current business processes and the degree of workarounds that you've got. We look at the degree to which the ERP system is actually meeting your business requirements. Is it providing the business critical information? How are your requirement gaps being addressed? You'd look at the degree to which the business has changed since you did your last review, and whether the ERP is in fact even still aligned to any change in your requirements. You might look at the appropriateness of the current ERP strategy and the degree to which you're even adhering to it. We'd look at the status of documentation, knowledge transfer, roles and responsibilities, skills, training, those sorts of things. And we'd look at the appropriateness of the current ERP version that's being run and the configuration of that. And the last thing that is an interesting one that we look at is we look at the budget that's actually allocated to annual ERP expenditure for things like training, consulting, report development, those sorts of things. So hopefully there's a bit of food for thought there and some ideas about what actions an organisation might consider would be appropriate and what they might undertake if they feel that they're experiencing some of these signs of ERP fatigue. Obviously, I'm certainly happy to talk to anyone who would like some assistance going through this process, or indeed talking about any other ERP-related challenges or issues that you might have where you might want an independent viewpoint. And my details are there on the screen, so I'm certainly happy to talk to you. Now, I think we've got a few questions that have come through that we want to address, but before we do that, is there anything that that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, just quickly, I just wanted to talk about a handful of the things that we here at Syspro specifically do to help you drive your ERP and to prevent ERP fatigue. And the first one is the technology tools that are inherent within Syspro, things like, in our language, e.net, like workflow and similar tools that allow Syspro sites to evolve the system to match evolving business processes without compromising your upgrade, without having to have dedicated coders hacking away there, and to provide a means to bring external data or rogue business processes back into the core system quite seamlessly. One of the key innovations in this field is that we've recently unveiled is SPM, or Syspro Process Modeling. SPM is a toolkit that allows Syspro sites to model their business processes within the Syspro system and then to automatically have these processes reflected within the Syspro operations. SPM is a valuable tool really to tackle ERP fatigue in Syspro sites to prevent it from taking place in the first place, as it unifies your documentation, it enables business-specific system ownership and system functionality. And as Syspro 7 starts to approach, there'll be a lot more features in this vein that we'll be announcing. The second thing I want to mention is that Syspro has kept up to date with the latest features and functionality from all of our technology partners, in particular Microsoft. Windows 8 is due for release at the end of this year, and it's incorporating touch technology. Syspro's adding these features in and the functionality within the standard Syspro version 7 as they come out from Windows. Another thing that we've recently improved upon is our end-user certification. All of our customers and their new staff can now keep abreast of Syspro features through a formal online certification process that's coming out in the next month. And that allows new staff as part of their induction to be very easily trained in Syspro as a starter point or as a refresher. The last couple, support zone, and Warwick touched on the importance of forums and these types of things. Syspro has a support zone, which itself is also being overhauled at the moment. There are videos there are manuals, there are tutorials. There are two different streams of forum, both a technical stream and a functional stream, and you can get answers in both of them from everyone from Syspro users through to Syspro staff through to the people that are cutting the source code of Syspro on some occasions. The next one is that Syspro is bringing on a new dedicated account manager into the Asia Pacific region starting at the end of this month. This person is going to provide another central point of contact for all of our customer sites, and one of the things they're going to be looking to do is to provide free of cost regular system audits, again, as Warwick's touched on throughout today's presentation, to make sure that everyone's getting the most out of Syspro. And again, in coming months, the Syspro App Store is about to be released, which is going to be a central repository of all of those little tricks and tips and custom scripting and custom reports and all kinds of things, dashboards, whatever they might be, all across the Syspro community for people to log in and access. So ERP fatigue is something that Syspro is very aware of and very driven to eradicate where we see it. So just before we head to the questions, just a quick word on Syspro. As I mentioned, we're an ERP software provider who focus on the mid-market. Our solutions can be deployed both in-premises or through the cloud. There are nearly 20,000 Syspro clients around the world in multiple countries, and we'd really love to talk to you about what your Syspro software can do if you have it, or how Syspro can replace what you've got and drive it to greater value. As I mentioned earlier too, copies of today's presentation are going to be available to everyone who's registered, so just check your inboxes for details on how to access them. And again, Warwick and I are very happy to address anything directly with you, so check your inboxes for how to contact us on that as well. Now, cognizant of the fact that we've run a little bit over time, we're just going to tick off just a couple of the questions really quickly. Thank you all for your attendance. The first one we've seen a little bit of, and I might let you address the answer if you like, Warwick, but I mentioned cloud. How does cloud or SaaS, software as a service, play a role in addressing ERP effectiveness? We've seen variations on that question from a couple of people so far.
I'd say that the ability to host an ERP is only a solution. So the concept of cloud or software as a service, it's only a solution if that indeed is the problem in the first place. So it may remove infrastructure complexity, but it doesn't necessarily impact the business processes itself or some of the disciplines like training that we've talked about. So it may speed up your implementation time, it may make upgrades easier, it may even be a cheaper financial model. But cloud applications obviously have their own set of technology, security or integration challenges. They themselves don't necessarily address all of the issues and challenges we've got in relation to process or application ownership within the business, process efficiency, data fragmentation, report quality, things like that. So there may be specific things that it does answer, but there's a lot more that we've talked about today that I think are probably bigger issues and bigger impacts. The second question that's come through is in relation to how much time should an organisation commit to something like a periodic ERP review or audit. I suppose that depends somewhat on the size of the organisation, the nature of the operations, the complexity of its processes even, and applications that it uses it. I'm working with one organisation at the moment. We've got around about 300 staff, and to be fair, they have issues on all fronts, people, processing and technology. And in that situation, we're spending a couple of weeks to sort out exactly what the issues are and what sort of actions we need to do to kick off immediately to get that low-hanging fruit, to make some progress and to start to make some inroads. So, we're trying to give them at least a roadmap of how to improve that process efficiency and effectiveness. The last one that I'll touch on that's come through is a question within the business: who should be the primary responsible owner for upkeep of an ERP system? Is it the IT department, the financial team, or someone else? Well, I hope I don't tread on toes here as to who asked the question, but undoubtedly the ownership of the ERP lies within the business. IT are a support function. They may look after the technology side, the technical side of your ERP, but ultimately it is the business who drives the change, business who really maintain it, look after it, configure it, change the configuration, etc. So I'll try and say that categorically it's the business.
Yeah, I echo what you said there too, Warwick, about that, about all of those in fact. Look, there's a couple more questions, but we've already run over time. I'd just like to thank everybody for their attendance. As I've said, copies will be made available, and any of the questions that we haven't answered, we'll send out direct responses to those of you who did ask them. And anyone that has further that you haven't submitted, as I said, our contact details will be in your inbox in the coming days, so please feel free to contact us. So on behalf of Warwick, I'd like to say thank you for attending today, and I hope we've given you some strategies to deal with ERP fatigue.